what we ended up. So we were talking about algae, and then algae has roles in the environment. For instance, it's one of the organisms that help us to clear out all the contaminants that we pour in the air, like CO2. So it fixes CO2, and then it helps to produce 80% of the Earth's oxygen. So that's kind of good for us. And then when it comes to increases in planktonic algae, that is called an algal bloom that can lead to release of toxins or die and consume oxygen. So that's something that can happen with these blooms. Also, it is helpful for oil production. I told you that some algae has been used to produce ethanol, that it is useful. It's a biofuel useful to enhance the gasoline that we use. And then they are symbionts with animals. This works. Okay, so now let's talk about protozoans. So protozoans are unicellular. They live typically in aquatic environments. Some of them, they can cause diseases, so we're going to see some examples. And then they have a life cycle in which they have either a terminal host or an intermediate host. So most of the protozoans live in water, but some of them, they can live in soil. There are over 50,000 species, and few of them, thankfully, there are pathogenic. However, those few that are pathogenic, they are hard to get rid of. An example is Plasmodium. We have different species of Plasmodium. Plasmodium species causes malaria. They are transmitted by the bite of mosquitoes. And there are signs and symptoms of this type of malaria that we have can vary according to the species. And they have a complex life cycle. So part of the life cycle is feeding, having us feeding in growing form that is called a trophozoite. And this trophozoite will be an immature form that is going to be transformed in an asexual or asexual reproduction. If it's in asexual reproduction, can be reproducing by fission, budding, or something that is called schizogony, which is multiple fission. Schizo means multiple. Schizophrenia, multiple personalities. So sexual reproduction is by conjugation, and some of them, they can produce a cyst, and then they survive harsh conditions. It's just like the spores. And this cyst will be considered like the transmissible form of these protozoans that produces cysts. Not all produce cysts. So here we have a conjugation in paramecium. So you have two paramecium mating. So they are these protozoans. They have micronucleus and micronucleus, and they are free living. So they live in ponds, for instance. Most of them, they require a large supply of water, and then in their cytoplasm, they contain vacuoles that they use to either endoscytose food and then keep it, store it as they use it, and then they also produce waste that it will be exocytosed. Some of the protozoans can have a pellicle, which is like a fuzzy structure in the membrane that they have, the plasma membrane. And then some of them may have cilia that they use to move. And within this, they can have a mouth-like structure that is called the cytosome. An example of this type of protozoans will be amoebas. Amoebas, they phagocytose food, they extend this cytoplasm, and then they ingest the food, they keep it in vacuoles, and then they eliminate the waste through an anal pore. So other ones, they might have a large group to feed that is called the excavata. And then examples of these protozoans that have excavata will be Giardia intestinalis. It has also some other name like Giardia lamblia or Giardia duodenalis. It's a diplomonad. It has two nucleus. Trichomonas vaginalis. It's called Paravasalis. It's part of the group Paravasalis, sorry. This one causes vaginitis in females and also urethritis in males. It is a sexually transmitted disease. It causes, in females, greenish discharge that is malodorous. And then it is easily treated with metronidazole. When a female has this type of infection, the partner has to be treated too, or the partners. It has to be treated too. And then we have this other species, which is part of the Glinozoa, which is Trypanosoma. Trypanosoma, we have different species. They cause infections that are basically transmitted by bites of insects. For instance, Chagas disease, which is most prevalent in South America. It causes inflammation of the liver, of the spleen, of the heart. The person can die of this. It is transmitted by a kissing bug. So as a kissing bug, it's in the surface of the skin of the person, it will bite, create a wound, and if it discharges these trophozoites, it will go into the wound, and then the person will develop the mature form of the parasite inside its blood. This is one of the parasites that changes its antigens. The antigens will be carbohydrates or proteins that makes these organisms to be recognized by the immune system. So they make the immune system to be alert. But in the case of trypanosomas, they cause chronic infections because they change the antigens as soon as the immune system starts attacking them. Another example of another trypanosoma will be, well, that was Trypanosoma cruzi, and then we have another one that it produces sleepiness. It is called sleep sickness disease. It is prevalent in some countries in Africa. It is transmitted by a tsetse mosquito, but the bite of that mosquito. And then amoeba is part of Amebozoa. It moves by the means of pseudopods. They have a slow motion, and then they have also multiple nuclei. Apicomplexa are non-motile obligate intracellular parasites because they don't have mitochondria, so they need to live inside the cells so that they can use the mitochondria from these host cells. And then sometimes we have these microorganisms or these protozoa that they can switch. Sometimes they can adapt to the environment and not necessarily need to live inside the host. So diplomonas as well, they don't have mitochondria and they have multiple flagella. Example will be Giardia lamblia. Paravasalis, they have an undulating membrane and they don't have a cyst stage. That will be the case of trypanosomas. And then for Euglenozoa, they are photoautotrophs or facultative chemotrophs. The other ones, they are heterotrophs. And then some of them, they are hemoflagellates because they are transmitted by the bites of mosquitoes when they're taking a blood meal. So this one, it's an scanning electron micrograph of Pseudomonas, of Giardia lamblia or duodenalis. It has this press shape, and then it's not shown here because it's a scanning electron micrograph, and it's at this level where it has this sucker disc that uses to attach into the duodenum, but it has kind of large nucleus on each side that make it look like if it has eyes, and in this end it has the flagella. And then this is Trichomonas vaginalis, that it has like this spindle shape. And then here we have Euglena with some chloroplasts here, and then vacuoles in this region. And then it has a nice spot. For some pathogens, we have Entamoeba histolytica that can cause dysentery, which is called amoebic dysentery. This one, the dysentery that it causes, it is sort of severe. The person can lose weight really easily. Same for Giardia lamblia, by the way. Infects children really easily, and then it causes something that's called failure to thrive, so that the kid doesn't gain weight. So with Entamoeba histolytica, the person can lose weight really quickly. It erodes the large intestine mucosa, so the person will have bloody diarrhea. And when this protozoan gains entry into the bloodstream, can go into the liver and cause liver amoebiasis. And then we have this free-living amoeba, Acanthomoeba, that infects corneas and causes blindness, and also may infect the brain, causing encephalitis. I'm sure that there have been a couple of cases recently of this type of infection I think in the state. And something that this amoeba does to our brain, it is actually destroy the tissue of the brain. So, and it causes irreversible damage. And then we have this other one that is called Balamutia, that causes granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. So many times when we have an infection in our tissue, like for instance, if someone has tuberculosis, it will create an immune system reaction where the body tries to confine the organism in a particular area to prevent the spreading, and it forms like layers of multiple macrophages around, and sometimes they fuse, forming gigantic cells. So this is called a granuloma. So same for this amoeba. And here is the diagram showing you the parts of an amoeba. So this is the cytoplasm, food vacuoles. They might have some vacuoles that have enzymes. This is the nucleus. And then these extensions are the pseudopods. And the pseudopods, they change the shape based on the state of the amoeba. If it's resting, you won't have as many, but if it's crawling towards a food, they will create a bunch of pseudopods. And then here we have the nucleus, and it feeds out of red blood cells. So here we have a clump of blood cells inside the cytoplasm of this amoeba. When it comes to Apicomplexa, they are non-motile obligate intracellular parasites, and they have complex life cycles. Two examples there are Toxoplasma gondii and Cryptosporidium parvum. So Toxoplasma gondii has a host, which is domestic cats, and these cats can shed the trophozoites in the feces, and if there is a pregnant female and she get in contact with these trophozoites, it can go into the body of the female, goes in through the placenta, and then infect the fetus. And the fetus will have part of, it will have encephalitis, you have many problems. But Toxoplasma gondii, it is part of what we call TORCH, which are infectious agents that can cause problems prenatally. So all of these infectious agents can cause infections in utero and then cause problems for the fetus. So it's TORCH. So another way of transmission, which is not shown in here, is through contaminated meat. Meat can be contaminated with toxoplasma, and whoever ingested will get toxoplasmosis. And then Cryptosporidium. We have a species that's called parvum that it is resistant to chlorination. It is transmitted by cysts, and I told you about this before. I mean, it can cause waterborne illnesses if municipal water can be contaminated with this. In someone who's immunocompetent, you will have a diarrhea, but that diarrhea is not going to be as severe as when someone is immunosuppressed. Actually, people who is immunosuppressed can die of a diarrhea with this because they will dehydrate. And then I told you about that these cysts are resistant to chlorination. If the water is not filtered in pools, and someone goes there, has Cryptosporidium, you will put it in the water, and then there is no one who goes to a pool who never ingests water. And if that person is an immunosuppressed person, he will get this infection. So that's why in pools that uses filters, this risk is null almost, unless the filter is broken. Now for Plasmodium. So you have a species of Plasmodium that can reproduce in the gut of an Anopheles mosquito. And then when the mosquito bites the host, it will inject the infective form, which is a sporozoite. And this sporozoite will go into the liver, and then it will start undergoing schizogony, and then it will produce merozoites. That's the half of the cycle of this Plasmodium. And then the liver cells will release these merozoites, and then you will start infecting red blood cells. And some species of merozoites, when they're infecting these red blood cells, form something that is called the ring stage. They form like a structure that if it was like a ring. Not all the Plasmodium produces this ring, but this will be the ring species. And then the erythrocyte will burst, and then you will infect new blood cells. So malaria causes, in essence, destruction of the red blood cells, hemolysis, anemia, and then as it's rupturing these red blood cells, causes nocturnal fever every 48 hours. So here is the life cycle of Plasmodium vivax. This is the one that produces this ring stage. So you have an infected mosquito that bites in a human. So it injects these sporozoites, and then these sporozoites grows into merozoites in the liver here, and then the liver burst, the liver cells burst. These merozoites goes into the red blood cells, and then inside the red blood cells you produce more merozoites, and some of them they will form the ring stage, and then these red blood cells will burst, and then you will infect more red blood cells, and the cycle continues. Now, something that happens with Anopheles mosquito, it is that you will have different mosquitoes, so you have female and male mosquitoes. So in the female mosquito, you will have actually the growth of these merozoites in the gut. And the female mosquito actually is the one that transmits these merozoites after it mates with male mosquito. And then the only one that transmits this form, it will be the female, not the male mosquito. And then you have as well the growth of these merozoites in the salivary gland of the mosquito, which is part of the digestive system. Another protozoan is Balantidium coli, which it is the only human parasite that causes dysentery. It is not very frequent, but moved by flagella. So here we have one of these protozoans that has cilia. So this is not Balantidium, but this is an example of a ciliate. So this is Paramecium. It has this little indentation that is the cytostome, and then somewhere here it has the anal pore. So it's through this part, and then store some of the food vacuoles, and whatever waste it has, it just releases it through the anal spore. And then we have another species, which are Vorticella, that sometimes they can extend along cilia. Now for slime molds. So in slime molds, we have these molds that looks like amoebas. They live by feeding on from fungi and bacteria, and then looks like, well, they form stalks just like the Myxococcus that we saw before, that bacteria. They form like a stalk and some spore caps that differentiate into spores. So here we have the life cycle of this slime mold. So you have an amoeba. They will form a clump when they are attracted by a chemical signal through chemotaxis like cyclic AMP. They form this aggregate, and they form a sheet that can migrate, and then they form a fruiting body. Then later on they form a stalk that is long, like 1 millimeter in diameter, and then at the end of this stalk they have a spore cap, and inside this cap, which you can see here, they have like these spores. So it's like Myxococcus, but it's a slime. We have plasmodial slime molds that they have multiple nuclei because you have a clump of cells. and they move like if it was a gigantic amoeba. And something that they have in the cytoplasm, they have this stream that helps to distribute the oxygen and the nutrients so that the cells in the center will receive also this oxygen and nutrients. So this is a sexual cycle of these molds. So you start with this multinucleate form that is going to grow, and then it's going to form in the cytoplasm these channels to distribute the food and the oxygen. And then they can clump, forming a group with spores that are called sporangia. And then you release these spores, and then you form another amoeba or plasmodium. And then they can form gametes like female male gametes that join, and then they fuse and form a zygote, and then they form this multinucleate form. Now for helminths, so we have two phyla. We have platyhelminths, which are the flatworms, and nematodes, which are the roundworms. These are the two phyla that we have. These are eukaryotes that are multicellular, and the adult, they typically have a large size that can be seen without the aid of a microscope. However, the infective form, the cysts, typically you can identify them with the microscope based on size, also based on color, and as well based on appearance of the cytoplasm. So since some of them, they lack a digestive system, or they have a reduced function of the nervous system, or they don't move as fast, they are parasites, so they need to live in a host. And some of them, they can have a complex reproductive system. So some of them, they can have two forms. They can be separate male and female. This will be the dioecious, and monoecious will be hermaphrodites. So they have both male and female reproductive system. And then the typical life cycle includes an egg stage, a larval stage, and an adult stage. So for some of the flatworms that are important, so we have trematodes or flukes. These are short, flat parasites that looks like a leaf, and they can have a ventral and an oral sucker, just like the Balantidium, coli, or amoebas. And then they have a cuticle that helps them to absorb food. And then we have Paragonimous species that are species that infects the lungs. And then we have schistosomas that live in the blood. However, they infect initially the duodenum, and from there they gain entry into the blood. One species that is important is Schistosoma mansoni. So here we have the structures of flukes. So this is like the ventral view. So in this case, it has like this oval shape. It has anteriorly an oral sucker, and then in the middle the ventral sucker, and then this will be the intestine. And in this case, we have testes and ovaries, so this is a hermaphrodite. And then this is Clonorchis sinensis. So this is how it looks in this light microscopy, the oral sucker, the intestines, and then this is the ovaries, these are the testes. Paragonimus, the life cycle. So someone may have ingested this crayfish that was having this flukes, and then when the person ingests this parasite, you would have this adult that will release the eggs into the human lung, and then the person will have this form that it will develop into something that is called miracidium. And then this person is going to have this infection in the lungs, and part of these parasites will go into the digestive system of the person because they will crawl up. So it will go from the lungs into the trachea, and then into the larynx, into the pharynx, and then the person will release this little miracidium into the environment, and then you have an intermediate host, which is going to be snails, and then the snails will develop out of these miracidiums the other form of their asexual reproduction that is called cercaria. And then the cercaria will leave the snail and enter into this crayfish, and then it would form something that is called metacercaria, which is a little bit smaller than the cercaria. And then the person ingests these metacercarias, and then you will have the infection in the lungs of the person. Any questions? Another type of platyhelminths will be the cestodes or tapeworms. Tapeworms, they have this structure that is called scolex, which is the head, that it has the suckers that allows them to attach tightly into the intestines of the host, and then it starts absorbing food through the cuticle. Attached to this scolex, the head, you will have a series of segments that are called the proglottids. And then these proglottids have male and female reproductive organs. So typically these cestodes or tapeworms are very long. Some of them can reach up to 3 feet long, or sometimes more. And when they are growing inside the host, they release part of these proglottids. And then they enter into the different parts of the digestive system. They start getting dehydrated, and then they form the eggs. So here we have an example of an adult tapeworm. So here we have the head, the scolex, and it has these suckers, and then through these hooks, they attach really tightly into the intestines of the person. It has its neck, and then it has all of these segmentations, which will be the proglottids, in which you have testes and ovaries, and then they have these genital pores. So these are hermaphrodites. And then again, when you break these pieces, they will start dehydrating in a way, and then they will make an egg. So we are the definite host for this type of worms. They reproduce sexually in us, and then the infected form, it is an egg. So someone may ingest an egg in contaminated meat. Depending on what type of meat you are ingesting is what type of parasite you will get. So for instance, Taenia solium infects pork meat. And the eggs typically are destroyed when you cook well this pork meat. But if it's poorly cooked, of course, the eggs will be in there, and then once they are ingested, they form these adults, and inside the host, they can go migrate through the bloodstream, go into the muscles, form muscle cysticercosis, cysticercia are cysts inside these tissues, or they can even go into the brain, and they cause brain cysticercosis. Similarly, as when Histoplasma capsulatum causes masses in the brain, this cysticercia also causes masses in the brain. And one of the signs and symptoms of the persons is like they have a lot of seizures. And then they take an imaging of the brain and they see this mass and they ask, well, what is your history? Or what have you eaten before? And they say, well, I tend to eat a lot of pork. And then they even take X-rays or MRIs from the muscle, and you can see the cyst. So it's very suggestive of seizures, cysts in your brain, and then in your muscle. It's very suggestive of this disease. And it's chronic. For whenever it reaches this, it's chronic. And then when it comes to the seizures, of course, they have to go and make a surgery in the brain to remove these cysts. Okay, so another cestode will be Echinococcus granulosus. This has a life cycle that includes us as an intermediate host. So we harbor the larval forms. When we ingest the eggs, we produce a larvae, and then the larvae migrate into our liver or the lungs and develop into a cyst. And then we will have this complex cycle with definite hosts like wolf. So here is the life cycle. So this adult tapeworm releases the eggs, and then we might ingest these eggs, and then we form this intermediate form, the larval stage, that can damage our liver. I mean, still that is not the adult stage. It can damage our liver with this hydatid cyst. But then the deers, they can ingest these eggs, and then these eggs are going to form a larvae as well in the deer, and then it's going to shed the larvae into the environment, and then this larvae as well can live in the liver or the lungs of the deer, and then this larvae is going to develop into this hydatid cyst in the host, into the intermediate host, in this case a deer, and these cysts are going to have this formation of this larvae that is going to have a scolex, and it's going to have a broad capsule. So this is how it looks. So these are the parasites inside this cyst. And now, when a wolf comes, it can ingest this deer, and then it will develop these adult forms, which is like a large adult with the scolex and all of these segments. And then this will be released from this host as an egg, and then the cycle will continue. Now, when the larvae are also released into the environment, in this case, the larva will die. But in the deer, which is eaten by the wolf, it will transmit this. Okay, so those were examples of flatworms. Now for roundworms. So they have a cylindrical shape across the short axis. They have a complete digestive system. And the males will have an spicule that it will be used to hook into the female to do sexual reproduction. And then most of them, they are free-living species, and some of them, they are parasitic species. Examples of parasitic species for humans will be Ascaris lumbricoides. They are very thin, these Ascaris. These are the ones that they can form very, very long extensions inside our intestines. It can actually occlude our intestines. And they can actually migrate from the intestines back into the stomach, back into the esophagus, and then they can go into the respiratory system. That happens during night. It is kind of said, I don't know if that's true because I wasn't living that era, that the Emperor Nero had this infection, and then that he died of that because part of the parasites went from the digestive system into the respiratory system, including coming out from his nose. And then when someone has Ascaris lumbricoides and several of these adults live in the intestine of the person, some of them, they get released, and then you can see it in the stools. Like, it looks like a spaghetti in the toilet. Now we have another species, Bailisascaris procionis, that is the raccoon roundworm. Trichuris trichuria. This is a whipworm. It's a very short worm that lives in the intestines of humans and infects really easily children. And when you have male and female roundworms of trichuris, the female during night goes into the anus and deposits eggs, and then goes back into the body. So one of the signs and symptoms is that the person has something that's called anal pruritus, which is itchiness in the anal area. So one way is very easy to tell is that you have perhaps a child like 5 years old that is constantly scratching. And then the diagnosis is done by something that's called the Scotch tape test. So basically, someone will, of course, will be wearing gloves, a technician, and then you will have Scotch tape, and then sample the skin of this perianal area. They put this Scotch tape in a glass slide, and then you can see the eggs of these trichuris. And then we have another pinworm that is called Enterobius vermicularis. This is also short, and it causes an intestinal infection. It's called enterobiasis. So here we have Enterobius vermicularis. This is the adult form in an electron scanning micrograph. These type of worms, they tend to kind of entangle with themselves. So here's the mouth, here's the intestines, here's the ovaries, and this is the genital port in this area, and then they have the anus in here. And then that's the female. Males are shorter. It has a mouth, an intestine, testes, and the spicule. This is the one that it uses to connect to the genital port in females so that they can have progeny. And then here is how this pinworm egg looks like. So it has a larva inside. So all of those previous ones, they have an infecting form by eggs. Now, some they have an infective form by larvae. So we have strong hyloides that causes reemerging infections. Necator americanum or Americanus and Ancystoloma duodenale. It will be roundworm that has hooks that enters the skin and they will be carried into our intestines. The Dirophilaria immitis, it is spread by mosquitoes causing heartworm disease. And then here we have these Filaria species. So filarias are very long, thin filaments that can enter through wounds or through mosquito bites. And this is necrotic tissue within the intestines. Some of these filarias will be very thin that can, once they enter a wound, they can infect or obstruct really easily the lymphatics, and it can cause edema in some parts of the body. Now let's look at arthropods as vectors. So arthropods, you know that they are animals with segmented bodies, and they have their exoskeleton the external exoskeleton is joined with legs, and then these vectors can carry these microorganisms, and they don't have basically the infections themselves. That's why they are vectors. So let's skip this. We're going to focus into mosquitoes and lice when it comes to these vectors. So here we have an example of a mosquito taking a blood meal. They can carry many microorganisms within them, including these parasites that we saw before, like Plasmodium, but also they can carry viruses. Some of these viruses or some of these parasites, they can grow either in the gut or in the salivary glands. And then here we have a tick taking a blood meal. I know it looks gross. So we have here human louse. It has these 3 pairs of legs. It fits through this hook that it has in the head. This is one of these species that it is transmitted by sexual contact as well. They can burrow, some of them, under the skin. They cause pruritus, and whenever they release their waste through the anal pore, that's what it causes the pruritus. When someone has this type of louse, some of these louse can carry bacteria like salmonellas, and then like Salmonella typhi. Same for rat fleas; they can carry that in their legs, and then cause infections in humans. Deer flies, they can carry infections into the deer, and then whenever someone kills a deer, well, the deer is not going to have a sign, well, I have Borrelia or any other infection agent for us. So it's important then to be careful. And then we have here this kissing bug that causes, that transmits trypanosomas, causing Chagas disease. So 2 types of transmission can happen with these vectors. It can be mechanical. Even flies, house flies, can be a vector. It can be mechanical when they carry these microorganisms in their feet, or they can multiply the pathogen inside, so that will be a biological transmission. And then the definite host is where you have the sexual reproduction. And then here we have some examples of vectors, including mites and ticks, that they can have these vectors, like dermacenter is a tick that it can transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever, ixoides that can cause Lyme disease, Ornithodorus that can cause babesiosis, ehrlichiosis, relapsing fever. And then for human louse, it's called Pediculus, the species, can cause epidemic typhus. Rat fleas, which is Xenopsila, can cause endemic murine typhus. Aedes mosquito and Anopheles mosquito can cause tularemia, dengue, Culex mosquito, Glossina tsetse, that can cause African trypanosomiasis. Culex can transmit also arboviruses. We will see this in the next chapter. And then the kissing bug, which is called Triatoma, can cause Chagas disease. So that's all for this chapter. Do you have any questions?